Democratic presidential hopefuls are seeing their popularity decline following the Ohio debate. And how is Senator Bernie Sanders dealing with the media blackout?
Team Rising is here. Roger Fisk is a Democratic strategist and an Obama administration alum. Henry Rogers is Capitol Hill reporter at the Daily Caller.
So we got some very interesting morning consult polling broke out this morning about the candidates' net favorabilities post-debate. I really like this particular one because they talked to over 12,000 Democrats to talk about their responses before and after for over a week. So it's a pretty robust finding. Now, what we see is the obvious headline that jumps out is Joe Biden took a massive hit there at a -5. The Tulsi Gabbard also took a -6, but what Morning Consult points out is that could be a result of this tiff with Hillary Clinton. So yeah, it might have endeared her to much of the progressive left, but many Hillaryites, I guess if there are some left in the Democratic Party, definitely did not take favor with Gabbard's response. What did you think, Roger, though, particularly of Biden's drop there? That seems to be not a great sign for a pretty middling debate performance from him.
First off, good morning.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here with Henry. This, I have to agree with some of my analysis the last time I was here, is roughly what one would expect, right? Which is there's basically a little bit of air coming out of the front runner at this point. You see the leavening, the benefits of hiring decisions made in the spring. I honestly believe that you win the fall and the spring, and the decisions you make then are really what drives success in the final 100 days. So this is, and you see just the mild uptick with Warren, which kind of replicates her larger pattern, which is just not really, advancing too quickly. So for me, every day that dynamic roughly stays the same, it benefits the folks in the top tier because it's another day that someone in the lower tier didn't rise at someone's expense. So in a sense, this is kind of going in the trajectory that I expected it would.
Yeah. What do you think, Henry? What do you make of this drop there at Biden?
I think we talked about it last time. I think that Biden has been continuing to fall in polls. He has been taking hits from everybody on stage, from across the board. And I think that he's going to continue to fall, personally. I think that candidates like Warren, who are really building a true base for themselves and building real numbers for themselves, will start to rise and rise even more as they have been. But I think Biden's going to sink, and I think we're going to continue to see that, honestly.
Yeah.
Roger, surveys show that Joe Biden's supporters are the least likely to be following the news closely. Does this mean that he's going to continue falling at kind of a slow pace? Like, a lot of people were expecting the bottom to just fall out, but maybe it's that his people just aren't following the race closely enough to all flee at one moment.
I actually hadn't stumbled onto that step, and that is very, very interesting. The Biden people could take more comfort in this trend if the first exercise was a primary. The fact that it's a caucus, I think, should be, and I'm assuming is, a source of significant concern for them, because this is a much different exercise. You're asking people to take 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 hours out of their evening, for the most part. And then the exercise itself is complicated, right, and you get into these kind of horse trading things and everything. So it's not just the drive-by exercise of just going in and voting in a primary. And that's why I think when we look at Biden's numbers, it's not so much the drip of the decline that I would be concerned about. It's my sense of his numbers are still there a mile wide and they're an inch deep. And when you are rolling into the caucus as an exercise, you need folks that are going to get up at 4:30 in the morning and trudge through sleet and snow. And I don't know if that necessarily is the profile of his people.
I think you're right, Roger, and that's what, Henry, that's what we see in his numbers, right? $9 million cash on hand, only $15 million raised. It's really a pathetic showing, I mean, relative to the rest of the race. And when you're in that mile wide, inch deep, that's exactly you're primed to just bottom out in Iowa.
No,
it shows nothing.
He's set up to fail.
Yeah.
He's set up to fail. And I think that's part of his problems of his campaign. I mean, they've kind of set him up to fail. I think, again, candidates like Bernie and Warren and all these other people who are putting a lot of money into Iowa and focusing on Iowa, Buttigieg, they're obviously going to do well because they're putting a lot of time and effort into a very important state.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your point about the hiring, too. What I had been hearing back in the spring was that, and actually the end of last year even, it seemed like a lot of people wanted to work for Elizabeth Warren. Like that was the place to go before she then bottomed out in the middle.
Sure.
Whereas Biden was very hesitant to even announce what he was doing, and he's famously indecisive, and he was indecisive on
He's a product
hiring.
of the Senate. They deliberate. That's what these guys do, is they deliberate.
And Sanders, you're not supposed to work for him if you want a future in the Democratic Party. So is that your sense? Do you think that Warren has the most kind of professional and talented staff at this point relative to the rest of the field?
If you were to look, just based on a numerical kind of analysis, I think that that's a fair conclusion. As I've said here a couple times before, if you're not in and actively building a presence in these states a year, if not 15 months before the actual caucus, everything else to me is just a drive-by. If you show up in July and you go to the Iowa State Fair and all that other stuff, it's a vanity project. It has no relationship to kind of operational reality and actually running in Iowa. So I think she's done exactly what she needed to. And the other interesting thing, and I just kind of connected it when you were saying, is every campaign has to hit a valley. Right? And so part of me thinks, if you think back to roughly a little bit earlier than this time in 2007, that the chattering class was becoming doubtful about Obama and things like that. So I think of how she navigated the Native American thing, and I think that was kind of proactively trying to bring on that bottom so that then as you climb, you don't still have that valley waiting for you. Because I think that's a very important and natural part of the cycle, is that each campaign at some point has to bottom. John Kerry polling at 3% in September of 2003, for example, 100 days later winning the caucus. So maybe she got that out of the way early, is my point with that.
That's a pretty good point. I mean, I think the main thing, though, what did actually really jump out to me is Bernie has quite a high favorability rating within the Democratic Party. It's not really something that you hear quite a bit. Everyone's like, yeah, it's the highest in this entire field. And
I find that quite interesting, honestly.
Right? I mean,
being he's not the establishment Democratic figure, but yet he is the leading figure in this poll, I guess, when it comes to Democrats. Bernie really is a front runner, I would say, and he's still in this race despite the media blackout that we've been talking about.
To your point, so Ryan, our very own Ryan, was on MSNBC last night making this point, pissing off some boomer viewers. Let's take a listen to that.
He's running up against this huge problem, though, that I mentioned earlier, of this media blackout. In the Democratic primary, this network and the New York Times have an enormous amount of influence. And this show in particular is an exception. It covers Sanders pretty regularly, but outside of that, he often either gets ignored or kind of laughed at as not a serious candidate, even when polls come out showing him in reasonable contention. Yeah.
So, Ryan, what was the point you were trying to make there?
Smart commentary.
Yeah.
Who was that guy?
That guy's good.
He really was onto something.
It was a conversation about how he's trailing in the polls, and how he has a different strategy of creating a new kind of coalition that he's going to try to bring to the Iowa caucuses in New Hampshire and broadly across the country. And so you can't necessarily poll it because these are people who haven't turned out before. But on the other hand, how do you create that new coalition if kind of the country doesn't know you're running?
Yeah.
How do you reach people?
What do you make of that, Roger? What do you think?
I don't agree with it, frankly. Only in the sense of that, if you could maybe make the case if this was his first campaign. But, the Sanders brand is essentially out there. His numbers are relatively constant. I don't see a causal relationship between his coverage and his support. And in fact, similar almost to the president in some ways, his support sometimes seems to benefit when he's not in the news. So being the darling of the chattering class and making progress on the ground are two very, very different things.
Yeah, what do you think? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well,
No, go ahead.
I think it's interesting. I think he's completely on a roll here. I think that he's obviously has the media against him. I think that you were spot on with the blackout thing. I think that there are a lot of cable networks and newspapers that lean left that should be giving this guy a lot more respect and a lot more attention, honestly, considering he is the front-running candidate in many of the polls.
It's funny, Hank.
But there's not.
It's funny, Henry, because for people on the right, we're so attuned to media bias, and then to see it watched, so to see it employed against somebody else, I feel very sympathetic because I'm like, I get it. Like, I understand what you're talking about.
I'm like,
here.
finally.
It's like you can see the structural forces in the media, like just keeping this guy down. I mean, Ryan, you wanted to make a point to Roger, but go ahead.
How hard is it to get these non-voters to come out to caucuses?
it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And it also has to be the product of engaging with them for at least 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
Because you need to do training, and at least the Obama organizing model, which was all focused on giving individuals the tools to go out and organize people in their own lives, is you don't want to look at the caucus goer as a single static persuasion exercise. You want to look at them 6 and 9 and 12 months out as someone to whom you want to engage, but then give tools to go off, and that they then organize the folks in their street, the folks that they go to church with, the folks that they work with, et cetera. So looking at them as one individual limits you. Whereas if you look at them as someone that you just need to give the tools to go off and support, or rather activate and organize 25 or 50 individuals, that's how you win the Iowa caucus. But that it takes a lot of time to rise, if you will.
Well said. All right, so you guys sit tight. We're going to come right back after a quick break.